We do have an update though, Wayne.
Yes.
We teased in our Kill List episode, our debut episode, that Ben Wheatley, it was in pre-production, I think at the time, for Meg 2 The Trench.
Yeah.
Wayne,
Yes.
August this year it is released. Ben
Right.
Wheatley's Meg 2 The Trench is filmed, it's in the can, it is ready for release later this year.
I can assume it's not going to be much like Kill List.
I don't think it's going to be like any film he's made.
No, not at all. This feels like a very kind of underground indie filmmaker suddenly going out and directing like a Marvel movie or something. Because did you see the first Meg?
I have listened to the soundtrack, that's as far as I got.
I seen the first one. Honestly, not that remarkable. Even when like my sister and I went to see it and we reviewed it, we couldn't even think of that much to say about it afterwards. Just, it's another shark movie that's not Jaws.
Is there any through line with Ben Wheatley's work? Can you recognise what he could bring to Meg 2?
No, not at all. It doesn't feel like anything. It's because it's much more kind of high concept.
Right.
It's much bigger budgeted. It's a monster movie because Ben Wheatley's films have always felt grounded. Another one we're talking about today, you can say, is maybe a little bit far out psychologically and whatnot, but there's always a groundedness, as we say, that kitchen sink approach.
Well, this film, Wayne, what we're discussing today, A Field in England, it's in a way, there is a lot of similarities with his previous work, but it's almost pushing it further. We're going into different territory here. Kill List was very much a grounded film. This is a little different. This film takes place in the milieu of the Civil War, and does it have much of a sway over this film? It's a catalyst, Wayne. It moves the story. It's using it to band together this disparate group of people. It's using beliefs of that time period, alchemy, for example. This idea that we can be taken in by these people who nowadays would be cast aside and laughed at and ridiculed.
I don't think it's necessarily important that it is about the Civil War. What's important is the fact it kind of happens on the fringe of battle. And yes, like you say, it's a way of bringing these characters together at this particular time period, because we don't see any actual fighting, we don't see any actual battles in this film. It's all kind of in the background. It's the backdrop for the story.
And a really important and insightful piece of information I gathered about this film, and some mythology, not necessarily about the film, but mythology in general. This film opens up, right? We're introduced to the characters, because we're introduced to Whitehead first, played by Reece Shearsmith, of the brilliant League of Gentlemen, and one of my favourite anthology TV programmes, Inside Number 9.
Okay.
One of the best shows on TV. Right, so we're introduced to Whitehead, as he's referred to as the coward. He's kind of, he's gone AWOL from his war. But how are we introduced to that character? He comes through a hedge. And do you know why that's of significance, Wayne?
Is it like a kind of breakthrough?
In English folklore, hedges are not just physical boundaries, but borders between worlds.
All right.
So
that makes total sense. So we don't know the world he's stepped out of. What's important is the one he's stepping into.
And I think that is important, this other world, because this is all about other worlds, the alchemy of that.
It's interesting also, you mentioned it's Reece Shearsmith, because when you look at the cast of actors we have, one is Reece Shearsmith, who, again, League of Gentlemen. Julian Barrett's in it, albeit briefly, famous for The Mighty Boosh. Mr. Michael Smiley, who along with Tom Noonan is like one of our mascots.
Right, Michael Smiley, Wayne, right?
Yeah.
This is the third film we've covered that he is in. First was Kill List, another Ben Wheatley film, where he is a hitman.
Yeah.
Second was Censor, where he's a sleazy producer. This film, he's a fucking wizard.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting career trajectory. But the point I was going to make is Michael Smiley was in the TV show Space. So it's interesting that he took these actors who are largely known for their comedy. But I don't think that was accidental. I think that was deliberate casting. Because would you agree this movie has a kind of tongue-in-cheek, quite sardonic sense of humour?
It's completely laced throughout with black humour. And importantly, Wayne, and I think this is why it works, the black humour in this film, it's never played necessarily for stupidity. It is played straight-faced, straight-laced, and you're laughing at the situation without necessarily laughing at the character. Though you do, but it's the way it is projected.
Absolutely. So many laughs in this movie. A character will say something, I'll laugh and think, ha ha ha, oh yeah, that probably happened, or ha ha ha, oh yeah, he would totally have been going through that at the time. So it's funny, but it has a very strong basis in reality. The kind of gallows humour, because we're talking about battles here,
right.
People dying, a time of horrible depravity and poverty and savagery. So there's a lot of gallows humour going through the film.
So let's set up those characters, right? Whitehead, he's of a master. He's a subservient, isn't he? He's the one who's deserting this war. But not only that, there is also Jacob and Friend.
Yes.
That is the name of the character.
That's what he's
Friend,
literally called, yes.
who he stumbles upon when he goes through to this other world, in brackets, the hedge, right? So, when he meets them, they are army deserters. They're deserting the battle. But he is also introduced to a guy called Cutler, played by Ryan Pope.
Yes. Who's not been in that much, really. I couldn't find that much information on him. He's described as a rough soldier who essentially works for a character which we'll come across later. But with Whitehead, we're talking about the differences in characters, because he's described as an alchemist's assistant. So we have to assume this guy is kind of a low-level guy. He seems like a kind of beaten-around guy. We find out he's fasting at one point. He seems very much out of his element in this situation.
But he's also, importantly in this film, Wade, referred to as a homunculist.
I do like that.
He is already set up, and as another word they continually use in this film, Wayne, is coward. And this is going to be important because this character is our lead character. He is going to send us on a character arc with him. So we're going to see the transformation, which is an important theme of this film.
There is a lot of that in this film because, again, it's a war film, sort of, more of a character study. And what I like is, I think this was maybe a deliberate choice. You say Cutler and Jacob, Friend, they're army deserters. Do we ever find which side they're fighting for? I don't think that's mentioned.
It's never stated.
Because I don't think it's important. What's important is they are all soldiers, they're all beaten down, they've all escaped, and they've been kind of banded together in this odd situation. Again, I don't think it's important that we know who was fighting against who.
It doesn't matter, Wayne. They're completely different from one another, but they're the same. It doesn't matter what side of the war they were on because they're going on a journey. And in many ways, Wayne, this film is very much a road journey, a road movie. You don't need the road. We've got the field, but it's the propelling forward in motion. We have a destination, which is referred to as the alehouse at one point.
Yes.
Okay.
I think I know what you're going to say.
We are introduced to the character Friend,
yeah,
who is laying there on the ground. He looks dead, sleeping, whatever you want to say. Somebody refers or somebody states, look, we're going to the alehouse. He props up. Okay, listen.
Must be English.
After New Year, I was doing the whole dry January thing.
Yeah.
February 1st, I was Friend.
Yeah.
Somebody mentions the pub. I propped up on the 1st of February like Friend does.
You sent me a photo of a pint you were drinking.
Yes. I think it exemplifies what we all felt on February the 1st.
I like this feeling of, I've just been through battle. You know what I could really use right now? A beer. But in a way, I think that does make them more human characters because they finish, what does one of the characters talk about? All I want is a belly full of food and a belly full of beer. But even then, in situations like that, they're kind of unattainable. And I think, in a sense, that's kind of what the alehouse is. It's sort of unattainable because they talk about it almost as if it's this mythical place. It's like heaven, it's like Eden, and they're constantly struggling towards it.
Which is why I was kind of paralleling it with the road movie. In a road movie, for example, you have a destination where you're trying to reach. But prior to getting to that destination, if they ever get there at all, it's the journey, it's the character arcs, it's what you learn, what you transform into. And I think that is why there is a lot of similarities with the road movie, like Easy Rider, for example. Easy Rider, there's not a destination they necessarily get to, but it's still classed as a road movie because you're going on a journey, you're seeing a transformation.
Well, the idea with Easy Rider, it was supposed to rep a certain time period, that kind of idealistic, optimistic, hippie period.
And the death of a generation.
Exactly, the death. Again, like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas did, that was lamenting on the failure of the hippie movement. Here, most of this film is spent with a lot of characters these few characters we have kind of walking down the field. But what's important, different backgrounds. Some of them are educated, some are not. Some of them are somewhat respected, some of them are not. Because for me, this hierarchy, on a battlefield, that would mean nothing. If you got hit with an arrow, probably going to die. Doesn't matter what background you're from.
This sets itself apart from a lot of films because we've so far raised the point of the Civil War. But this is a very psychedelic film, Wayne.
Now you could say that again.
And Ben Wheatley stated this. Why the psychedelic approach to this film? He said, just reading about it, we read about the magic men going about blowing ground up mushroom dust into people's faces and people having experiences. That was really interesting. And we read about mushroom circles and how they were considered to be portals to fairy worlds and how if you went through one, it was very difficult to escape. How time moves at different speeds either side of the mushroom circle. And that you need 4 men, and here's important, Wayne, for a bit later, and a rope to pull you out of that.
Very true. That's literally true. Interesting you said that as well. You said, but the mushroom circle, this side
Yes.
and that, kind of parallel with the English hedgerow, is it not?
Exactly.
You go from one side to the other.
There's
I was thinking as well about this doing mushrooms. To be fair, at the time, it sounds kind of weird, but you'd think anything to escape the drudgery of the time, just the misery of endless, relentless battle. You're going to do anything to escape
And
that.
you've got to remember, in this time of alchemy, Wayne, people used the natural world to further themselves, to rid enemies. You know, when I'm not moonlighting here, Wayne, as half of probably the best podcast on the internet,
Facts.
you know, I do landscape gardening. And little things you learn across the way is like, even round here, Wayne, yew tree berries. You know what a yew tree is?
Yew tree, yeah.
Right? The berries on that contains taxin alkaloids. People back in the day, when we're talking about civil wars, etc., they would use that, ground up them red berries, put them into red wine, for example, and rid their enemies of them. So, you know, the natural world has been used by man as a means to an end for a long time.
Yeah, is that not also the basis of pantheism, which is essentially not worshipping a god like the creator, but worshipping essentially the natural world and all it provides?
I think it's a lot of them religions, Wiccan, pagan, for example.
Because back at this time, again, you're talking alchemy, so you're talking these beliefs which we now see as kind of silly and outdated, but back then were taken very seriously. Like you'd have like alchemists who are appointed to like royal positions, because we have Whitehead, who's essentially kind of like a squire. He's an alchemist's assistant.
He's the subjugated man, isn't he? He is a master. And Smiley O'Neill is the complete opposite. He sees himself as the alchemist. He is the master, and he will bend people to his own will, whereas Whitehead's very much, he's accepted his place in life. He's the underling.
The introduction of O'Neill, Michael Smiley's character, that's pretty much the first time we have kind of a clear antagonist. And Smiley plays a character, he even refers to himself as the king of cold-hearted bastards. And what I like about his character, he's not that physically intimidating. Like, he's not a big, strong man, he's not much taller than the rest of the crew. But what's important is the power he wields, which I think does very tie much into the kind of thematics of this film. The power people have, and more importantly, I think, the authority that people have.
You know, and speaking of O'Neill and his power and, you know, how this comes through, and we're talking about the humour of this film. I think one of the best and funniest threats I've heard in film in quite a while, he says, do not address me as friend, and do not speak to me directly again, otherwise I'll turn you into a frog.
Again, sounds like a funny insult now, but back then, if this was the kind of stuff you really believed in, if you believed there was a potion or you could blow dust in someone's face and turn them into a frog, that's a very legitimate threat.
But that is one of the best elements of this film, Wayne, the dialogue. It is pointed. It is written by, you know, Ben Wheatley's collaborator and partner in real life, Amy Jump, this film. Unlike most of Wheatley's other films, none of the dialogue in this film is improvised. It's completely scripted. There was one single line of improvisation, and that is it.
Was that like an important credo they laid out at the beginning? Because I know like the likes of Billy Wilder would give the actors a script and be like, don't improvise, stick to the script.
Well, part of it, I think, is, Wayne, this film was shot in 12 days.
Yes, it
in
was.
Guildford, Surrey. Just 12 days. Do you know what other film was filmed in 12 days?
Which one was that?
Samuel Fuller's Shock Corridor. It's a great film, murder mystery set in a mental hospital. But when you're moving that quick, I don't think you have a lot of way to improvise. And sometimes I think that's for the better, because this is a very tight and is a very pointed film. We're not trying to be loose here, carefree. I think it is an agenda. It's trim and to the point. We're at an hour and a half or slightly under.
I think it conveyed almost as well to the kind of immediacy of the film. And Wheatley said himself, he said, filmed in 12 days, he said, actors love that stuff. Normally they spend loads of time in trailers waiting to be called, as you'd imagine. Costume dramas sound expensive, but the reality is that people didn't change their clothes and it was outside, so you don't light it. That's why so many cowboy movies were made in the 50s and 60s, because they were filmed in landscapes outside. This film pretty much all shot outside, shot in fields. Don't need to worry about permits or setting up light if you're using natural light.
Exactly.
And again, right, bang the scene out, bang the scene out, bang the scene out. Don't have to worry about waiting around, you know, choosing which is the best take. Very much a kind of immediacy to it.
Yeah, it's the script, Wayne. Amy Jump's script is so good, and I think it's one of the most well-written pieces of, especially genre cinema.
Yeah.
I would extend that personally to cinema, but for genre cinema, the juxtaposition between eloquent
Yeah.
and the profane.
I was going to say, I'd written down a mix between kind of modern and classic vernacular, because one of the first insults in the movie is Trower, who was a superior of Whitehead's,
Yes.
screaming at him, and he yells, "Damn your impudence, your impudence, you obsequious little turd," which is one of those, a kind of Shakespearean insult almost, until you get to the word turd, of course. But then in the other parts, people will just be talking normally. I want to go and have a drink. I'm going to have a shit. I'm going to do this. So it's kind of an
There is
interesting
toilet humour.
Except there is toilet humor, but that's interesting you bring that up. That scene where they're in the field and they're having something to eat, and is it Jacob?
Jacob's having a shit.
Jacob just says, "I'm going to have a shit." What I like about that is it's kind of dealing with the minutia of war. You see war films, you see fighting, battles won, everybody goes home. But you think about that, yeah, all those clothes they're wearing. What does someone do if they need to take a shit? What if they need to take a piss? What happens in that situation? Because it's given quite a lot of attention, because he goes and takes a shit and will get stung on the balls by nettles.
He falls over, gets stung on the balls. Friend is quite a good friend. Does Friend not help him up?
He does,
Are
yeah.
you helping a shitting guy up? Somehow that seems unhygienic.
With stung balls.
Stung balls.
I don't know. But again, because it covers that kind of interesting minutia. Another one is that the character of Cutler, someone says, what do you do? What's your contribution? He says, I make buttons. You might laugh at that and think that's stupid and minor, but if you don't have buttons, what's going to hold your clothes on? You're not going to fight without them.
It's practical, Wayne.
It's very practical.
It's
But
very.
that's what I mean, the minutia of battle, because when you have these characters coming together, just talking around a pot of food, you get to see who they really are. And like you say, through the dialogue, it's, again, pointed, black humour, sardonic humour. At one point, I think it's Jacob, after the battle, he says, "This war is not to my liking, too much marching about." I imagine a lot of battles back then were just people marching about.
I think this whole film is the juxtaposition between the two. It's the mundane and the magnificent. It's the profane and the eloquent. The visuals set that up. The dialogue sets that up. Everything is grounded towards that. And when we're talking about dialogue, Wayne, there's a verbal motif in this film. Let the devil in. You hear this repeatedly, and it both foreshadows and tells us about the subservience to a force larger than you and the inner fight. So even those little nuggets were drip-fed throughout the film. They're setting up. They're foreshadowing. This is the other world, as I've said. Let the devil in. This is what they believe. And there is a point when, O'Neill shows up, and I think this is a great piece of dialogue. He says, I thought the devil would have been a bit taller.
You do that, like, even say in Braveheart, when Mel Gibson comes, he goes, "Oh, William Wallace is 7 feet tall." This weird kind of idolizing of a kind of weird of a historical figure almost.
I did think when he said that, Michael Smiley quite tall.
Yeah, he is. Was he cast because he was a bit taller? He's not lots taller, like I said earlier. His intimidation comes from the way he talks and from his power over people.
I think O'Neill in this is a little indebted to, can you remember Matthew Hopkins, the Witchfinder General?
I've got him
I
written down,
really
yeah.
find there's that, through line between that. That's one of the influences I'd gather in the writing of this film, the direction of this film, and the portrayal of O'Neill.
Because Matthew Hopkins was actually active at the time, I believe, because he was active during the Civil War, when there was lots of chaos, and he could come along, make money, with the witch finding and everything. But the hat, the suit, the way he talks, did very much conjure that image of Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder General, as he called himself. Not an official position, he called himself that.